increases as refugees in South Africa refuse to back down on their demand to be evacuated out of South Africa by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, or the UNHCR. Since the beginning of October, refugees have been living on the pavements in tents and makeshift structures outside the UNHCR offices. In the past weeks, police had to use tear gas and rubber bullets to scatter the refugee group in Cape Town, while a case of trespassing has been opened against a group that has been sitting outside the UNHCR premises in Pretoria. We've got Mienkie Steyler, a media officer at Amnesty International South Africa, to talk about the situation. Good to have you. Thanks so much for coming in to chat to us.
Thank you for having us.
So, in short, let's talk about the UN policy regarding refugees that are wanting to leave South Africa.
Yes, so the UN is offering them voluntary repatriation to their countries of origin. Unfortunately, it is not the UNHCR's mandate, I suppose, to repatriate them to, for example, Canada, which some of them are asking for. I think Dubai came up at one point as well, but I think Canada, as far as I understand, is one of the top locations, and that's not something that's going to happen, unfortunately. Yeah. So as far as we understand, what's happening at the moment in Pretoria is police are negotiating with the refugees and asylum seekers, with the migrants, and hopefully some decision will be made. For us as an organization, the biggest worry also at the moment is people's rights and the human rights situation that they're all living in on the pavements, as you said yourself, water, sanitation, cleanliness, children. The children that are there are of great concern. And of course, what we saw in Cape Town a couple of weeks ago was absolutely horrific. So we're pleased to see that at this stage, the police appear to be taking a more measured approach, and they've been given a few days to also evacuate the premises, to leave the premises as well. So hopefully we won't see a repeat of what we saw in Cape Town.
Well, I mean, when we look at the situation of these asylum seekers and refugees, and we need to obviously understand that they are refugees and asylum seekers. And do we know that the entire group that is picketing do actually fall under these categories?
Yes, so that is a very, very good question. Also, what we've been told is that if they do not evacuate, as they've been asked peacefully, people will go in and will check who has documentation, who doesn't. But this does bring me to a point that we have actually recently published research that has shown that the asylum management system in South Africa is failing people who are arriving. So therefore, just because people don't have documentation doesn't mean that they don't have legitimate reasons to be here, that they didn't have legitimate reasons for leaving their countries of origin either, because they do, some of them have been in the system for 10 to 20 years. They're really struggling to get documentation in the first place. So that is a huge problem in itself that needs to be fixed too.
Yeah, that we do know, and that's where the South African government's role needs to obviously be fixed with regard to the documentation of asylum seekers and of refugees. But we saw yesterday that the big group gathered outside in Pretoria. Obviously, a case of trespassing has been opened against some of the refugees who actually scaled the walls of the UNHCR to gain access into the building. The UNHCR then saying that they actually did let them in. But let's talk about this. What actually is the role of the UNHCR in all of this? What should they be doing for these refugees and protecting them?
They should be protecting them within the country. What I would have suggested is possibly moving them to a temporary space. They did this in 2008 during the xenophobic attacks. They set up temporary camps. Of course, we don't want to see permanent camps. That would be quite difficult to maintain, and there are lots of issues and resourcing of such camps. But maybe a temporary space where they could be kept safe and then processed. Exactly what you were saying: who is coming from where, who has what concerns. Because even though documentation is obviously very important, and maybe some people will say, well, if they don't have documents, they should be deported. The UNHCR would agree with us that because people have suffered, it's difficult for them to get hold of documentation. They do have to take this on a case-by-case basis and speak to every single person. It might take a long time. As far as we understand, there's about 300 people there, but it's very important that each person is handled as an individual, as a human being, and each person's story is heard, and that the decisions are made. And that is also, as far as we understand, the role of the UNHCR. But like I said earlier, it's not their role to repatriate people to a third country, to a different, say, Canada. They can help them to go back to their countries of origin, but of course, if that means that someone will, be threatened with death, going back, or they're going back into a war zone, the UNHCR would not do that. They would prefer to keep them here, prefer to keep them safe here.
Yeah, and that's the problem, is that they're saying they are not safe here,
and they don't feel safe.
So, it's a very difficult situation where we talk to the issue of xenophobia. The South African government are saying it's not xenophobia, it's criminality. But you've got the refugees that are now looking for safety. It's a very difficult situation for both parties, I can imagine, to try and find a solution to.
It's extremely difficult, and we've spoken to refugees. We did a research report over 2018, last year. We spoke to a vast number of refugees, and the stories that we heard were that the fact that they don't have documentation, the fact that they cannot access education, they cannot access health services, they are identified as foreigners on public transport, for example, or in their communities. They do actually feel vulnerable and threatened, and if we could have a system that worked, so where people were here and they felt legitimate, and also a system of education amongst people living in South Africa, people who consider themselves citizens, but also people who have settled here, about what the rights of refugees are, why refugees have come here. Some refugees told us that they would go to Home Affairs and people would say to them, there is no war in Somalia, there is no war in the DRC. And these kinds of narratives are echoed in communities. Our leadership as well, unfortunately, we gathered comments made by leaders publicly that really are xenophobic and that really fuel these narratives that foreigners are here to steal your jobs, foreigners are here to use up resources, when in fact if there could be a joint effort to explain that people don't come here unless they are forced to, then that would really improve things in the first place. But secondly, a much bigger job, but just as important, the asylum management process at the Department of Home Affairs has to be fixed urgently.
Yeah. Just finally, there were reports that those in Cape Town were actually told to walk to the Namibian border or to get as far as they can. Is this the truth? Did this actually happen?
As far as we understand, they are saying that they want to do it, that they weren't told to do it, but they want to do it as a form of symbolism as well. It echoes what we've been seeing, the caravan, or the caravan is not really a correct term, but the groups of people that have been trying to get to the United States from South America, for example, also were walking together, and how symbolic it is. So as far as we understand, they weren't told to do it, that they want to do it, and or may want to do it if they're forced to, and that would be a form of symbolism as well. All
right. Well, we'll keep a close eye on that story, but thanks so much for coming in to talk to us about the refugee situation here in South Africa. You saw scenes of around about 300 refugees that had gathered outside the UNHCR. They had scaled the walls, and the Pretoria officers, they are demanding that they get moved from South Africa to a country where they feel safer, maybe Dubai, maybe Canada, but the UNHCR cannot do that, unfortunately. My guest here was Mienkie Steyler, who is the media officer at Amnesty International. Let's take a break. We'll see you after this. We'll give you a final update and take you around the country with regard to the SAA strike. Stay tuned.